Star Wars 7x7, episode 2035. This is it, the final Resistance briefing. We are talking about part 2 of The Escape, which is episode 19 from season 2 of Star Wars Resistance. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. So here we are, the last Resistance briefing, because this is the final episode of Star Wars Resistance. After 2 seasons and just over 40 episodes, we've arrived at the end. And as we left our heroes, well, I guess I should say first, this is a full spoiler briefing, so if you haven't seen the episode, then by all means save this episode for a later date, or this episode of the podcast, I should say, if you don't want it spoiled for you. But if you're okay with me jumping ahead and in, then let's do it. And I will say right at the top of this that the episode puts us in a situation where things seem about as hopeless as they've ever seemed in Resistance, and yet the heroes are able to save the day. And I feel like for the most part, it is an earned situation. I mean, you know, possibly maybe the one thing that is the most outlandish potentially is the notion that CB-23 from a random data port somewhere in the midst of the ship would be able to shut down the entire shield systems of the interestingly unnamed Star Destroyer. Somehow this Star Destroyer that Commander Pyre and Agent Tierney are on has never been named in Star Wars Resistance. We have no idea what it's called, but anyway, you know, the fact that an astromech could shut down the entire shield system and lock them out, yeah, straining credulity a little bit. But I mean, this is a space opera, it's a fantasy, so, you know, just go with it. Just go with it. And as opposed to, say, you know, a handful of TIE fighters being launched, you know, the screen, like, they filled this up. They shoved every single TIE fighter that they could into the screen for this. And I was really appreciative of that. That also lends to the feeling of desperation and, you know, sinking hope that you get. You know it's going to turn out okay, but still, the fact that it's able to at least convey the emotion to some level is pretty spectacular. And even moments where it seems like they're stuck down in the well in the engineering space, where they were able to get a message out to the Colossus to warn them that the First Order was coming, they managed to sneak into a maintenance hatch port, and you think, haha, they've gotten away. And then one of the stormtroopers reports to Commander Pyre and said, we forced them into the maintenance hatch like you ordered. And you're like, oh my gosh, that doesn't usually happen. Like, oh, they were really trying to get him in there? That's not good. And then, sure enough, the next scene, you see them sneaking around and they're caught. It's like, oh man, this is bad. But of course, they are able to manage to find a way to rescue Tam, get off the Star Destroyer, fight the Star Destroyer, destroy the Star Destroyer, save the day, and all that good stuff. Agent Tierney appears to be force-choked to death by Kylo Ren prior to the Star Destroyer exploding, and Pyre, who was knocked out in the process of the battle, must have died when the Star Destroyer exploded. At least I certainly hope that's the case. I certainly hope that they're not suddenly going to say, oh, somehow he managed to get to an escape pod and survive or something like that. These things are options, of course. And the same, I guess, would go for Jace Rucklin, potentially. I mean, the last we saw him, he was knocked out by Tam in one of the random Star Destroyer hallways. He never appeared in the episode again, so presumably he is going down with the ship as well, unless something happens where he's able to figure out how to go to an escape pod. It is one of those things where if you don't see the character die on screen, then you don't necessarily know for sure if they're dead. And yeah, as we found out from, you know, Captain Phasma in The Force Awakens, she was on Starkiller Base, but apparently managed to get off of there before it blew. And same thing with Emperor Palpatine somehow, although that's probably a slightly different situation, I would think. And I will admit, freely, like, you know, I'm not going to try and hide it. I felt that welling up when Niku and Tam were finally reunited, and Niku's response was, I'm so glad you're back. Things in maintenance will be so much more efficient now that you're here, and we can get so much done. And, you know, It's so funny that Niku really does tend to wear his heart on his sleeve as a character, and how he was just so broken up when Kaz was going to join the Resistance a couple episodes ago and say, "You're my bestest friend, I can't leave." Like, this feels almost like the opposite of that in a way. Like, he doesn't have those kind of feelings for Tam, but to me, it felt like it was... he didn't even know how to deal with the overwhelm of what went down with Tam. And so his brain just kind of short-circuited it into, all I can deal with my emotions at this moment is, we're going to get to work together again. And it's so exciting and everything will be great. But, you know, just the hug was so beautiful. And I was just like, oh, that's so awesome. So anyway, I would say overall a satisfying conclusion to the season, and I'm not going to say that it was a satisfying conclusion to the series, and not because of anything that the folks at Star Wars Resistance did or didn't do. I'm going to dig into that in a separate episode, so, you know, we'll have a longer talk about Star Wars Resistance, but that's going to do it for the most part for this breakdown on the final episode. There is one special reveal that happened, though, that I want to share with you, and I'll share that with you after the break. Stay tuned. Hey Rebel Rouser, I've made some changes to the asteroid belt level at patreon.com/SW7X7, and they are all with sponsors in mind. So if you want to get the word out about your business, your product, your service to a dedicated Star Wars audience, then please check out patreon.com/SW7X7 and look for the asteroid belt level for details. Again, that's patreon.com/SW7X7. Welcome back. So if you remember back to Star Wars Rebels, in the credits of every episode, the character Chopper, the droid that was part of the Spectre Cell, was always listed as himself, right? You never knew who was actually the voice of Chopper, or, you know, whether there was a voice. And it turned out that in the very last episode of the series, it was Dave Filoni. Dave Filoni was named as the voice of Chopper. And so a similar thing happened with Star Wars Resistance. For the entirety of the run, the droid Bucket was identified as himself. And at the end of this episode, the reveal happened here as well. Justin Ridge, who is a supervising director and executive producer of Star Wars Resistance, he is the voice of Bucket, and they revealed that in the end credits of this final episode. So there you go. One last reveal from Star Wars Resistance, and one last Resistance briefing has come to an end. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode and all the episodes as always. And may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2020 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.